the White House said that the president's open to talking about the debt ceiling in a separate discussion about ways to control spending. I mean, what do you think about when you hear that they kind of want to separate those two, is what they say?
Whichever way they want to talk about it, I'm very clear. We will not pass a clean debt ceiling here without some form of spending reform. So there'll never be a clean one. I don't know how they want to say it, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we're going to get spending reforms. I believe you have to lift the debt ceiling. But you do not lift the debt ceiling without changing your behavior. So it's got to be both in front. Yes, sir.
And there you have Kevin McCarthy vowing not to pass a clean debt ceiling bill, opting instead to demand conditions be met. Now, before we cover anything else, I just want to make it perfectly clear exactly what it is that Kevin McCarthy is gambling with. If the debt ceiling isn't raised, as it's been done for over 100 years without fail, we risk destroying the full faith and credit of the United States, domestic and global markets, and the stability of the U.S. economy. Just note here that the U.S. has hit its debt limit, and so the Treasury Department is now using what it's calling extraordinary measures to meet its obligations for a limited amount of time, but that'll only get us to roughly June of this year. If the debt ceiling isn't raised by then, we'll see our economy crater and the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency put at risk. That is the fire that Kevin McCarthy is playing with here. Just want to be super clear about what Republicans feel entitled to do once they're given even an ounce of power. So the solution here is obviously a clean bill raising the debt ceiling. But what we know, and what was just reiterated by McCarthy, is that Republicans won't do that because they see this as their only opportunity to hold the economy hostage in exchange for some concessions. Now, the term McCarthy is using here is spending reform, which is a shiny new phrase that replaces the old phrase of entitlement reform, which means eliminating Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That was obviously too unpopular for Republicans to repeat, and so instead they just sanitized the title and once again began threatening cuts. But hey, I'm sure nobody will notice. So what does spending reform mean? Well, it turns out that Kevin McCarthy was asked about exactly that, about what he would cut from the budget to achieve those spending cuts, and here's what he had to say.
Where should those budget cuts come from right now? Medicare and Social Security, the White House insists Republicans want to cut. What cuts do you want?
Well, let me be clear about that, and I've been clear many times. No, we're not talking about that. And to really be able to do this right, I'm not going to negotiate this in the press, right? I respect the conversation we had together, and we will continue that.
In other words, he won't tell you. So Republicans went from admitting out loud that they want to eliminate Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid to just now not telling you what they want to eliminate. Why? Because they know that whatever they land on isn't going to be popular. And so instead of being forthright about their own agenda, they'd rather try to enact that agenda behind closed doors because they know that whatever it ends up being, it's going to be bad. Not for nothing, but when you're too afraid to admit what you're going to do with power, you're probably doing it wrong. By the way, this isn't even the GOP's first foray into offering up policy positions under the umbrella of spending reform. They also tried pushing for the Fair Tax Act, which would eliminate the IRS, all personal and corporate income taxes, the inheritance tax, and the payroll tax. And all of that would be replaced by a 30% national sales tax, which would be a gift to the ultra-wealthy, because instead of collecting income tax commensurate with your income, which for the wealthy is a lot, instead, they'll just slap a flat tax on all items, which means every time you want to buy a shirt, a meal, a roll of toilet paper, eggs, it would cost 30% more. And so now it's not the wealthy being taxed based on their income, which is disproportionately higher than everyone else's. It's everyone else, the working class, that carries the brunt of the tax burden. Because something working class. And think about the effects of a law like that. Our tax revenues would absolutely plummet, which would mean less funding for programs that people rely on to survive, which means people pay out of their own pockets and have less disposable income, which means less spending, and that'll contract our economy. And because we'd have leagues less tax revenue, our deficit would get even more lopsided, which means it would be impossible to shrink our national debt, which is that thing that Republicans pretend to care about, even though all of their political policies actually make it worse. There is no planet on which the elimination of all income and corporate taxes being replaced by a flat sales tax does anything other than drive our deficit through the roof. And so while Republicans crow on a daily basis about fiscal conservatism, in reality, they don't care about that in the slightest. Their 2017 tax cut exploded the deficit and led to the biggest contribution to the national debt in history. And now, 5 years later, they've gone right back to pretending that they care about getting our debt under control, while simultaneously introducing legislation that would only serve to explode it even further. You could fly a 777 in the space between what Republicans say and what they actually do. So what's the solution here? The solution is to listen to Hawaii Senator Brian Schatz. He said, quote, "In exchange for not crashing the United States economy, you get nothing. You don't get a cookie, you don't get to be treated like you're the second coming of LBJ, you're just a person doing the bare minimum of not intentionally screwing over your constituents for insane reasons. That's all. This is not a negotiation, because once you let the hostage takers know that hostage taking is an effective strategy, they'll employ it again and again and again. And it may have worked for those Republicans by withholding their speaker votes until they could exact their concessions, but Democrats aren't nearly as weak as Kevin McCarthy is. And so if you want to know what Democrats should give up in exchange for not cratering our own economy or our own currency or our own markets, the answer is absolutely nothing. So we have until about June before Treasury's extraordinary measures run out. Hopefully by then we'll find out what it is that Republicans are even looking to do, if they've deigned to allow us to know by then. But regardless of what scheme they cook up, I hope that it's met with the exact same response by the Democrats, which is that there will be no negotiation for a debt ceiling increase. Because while Republicans might find joy watching things burn to the ground, the rest of us don't. But with the next general election looming, it'll be important to realize the damage and suffering that Republicans are willing to bring if they're given any power at all. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.